And then I found Red Dead Hot. Oh, God of mercy. I found Red Dead Hot. That's very hard to say, by the way. Oh, God. Oh, my goodness. It's real tongue twister. Anyway, so this for. Fucking hell. This. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I took a little bit of time off just to reevaluate things because I was feeling very burnt out and depleted in a way that I didn't really make sense. But when I recorded my last video and when I was in the midst of posting my last video, I knew that I would need to take a break just to think about things, to consolidate my feelings, because I realized that this year has been quite an abysmal year for me in terms of reading. And not because there is a shortage of things to read, because I think I have a never-ending TBR, and there is so much that I personally have not read that I know that I can read. But I think that I have discovered that I am very much affected by the state of the world. And the state of the world creeps into my ability to enjoy things in a very real way that I did not realize until this year. Because you're inundated with the news cycle, and I feel like I'm getting fed all the worst things that are happening in the world. And that has somehow triggered the part of me that enjoys things. I would consider myself a voracious reader. And even when I don't like a book, I'm still able to, for the most part, read it. And I found myself in a position now where this is a book that I clearly would enjoy if I was quote unquote normal, if my state of mind was good. And I'm not enjoying it. I can't concentrate. I can't focus. I can't read. And I was getting very, very concerned. And so that's kind of why I stepped away, because I feel like if I just kept on churning out videos, then you would start to see me slipping, basically. And I felt like you would be able to detect that I was not having a good time and I wasn't reading anything I was enjoying. I know sometimes people skim books, but I didn't want that, because if I'm going to give a review about a book, I kind of want to have read it in depth. I don't know if this is just me, but I don't really feel like it's right to give a review of a book that I haven't properly read or a book that I haven't properly analyzed. And that was where I was at, because without focus, I can't read. And if I can't read, then I cannot analyze the subject matter. And if I can't analyze the subject matter, then I can't give you anything that I feel would be of any use to you in the event that you actually wanted to read the books that I was recommending. And so I just felt I needed to step away. That felt very long-winded. I have in that time managed to read quite a few books, not as many as I would have hoped. And in many ways, I'm very glad that I didn't set a reading challenge for this year, because somehow I think there is a part of me that knew that it would be futile and I would be disappointed. So now I have just been focused on trying to read things that I like, going back to maybe things that I have liked in the past to see if it can trigger concentration for me. And it's helped somewhat. I don't really feel completely back to normal, but I have read a few things and I thought it would be nice to come on here and talk about it. Also, if you have been where I am right now, where you are finding it difficult to read, even though you love it, because there is something quite debilitating about not being able to do something that you love. And I don't think I felt this way since 2023. And I'll get like a tiny bit vulnerable. I won't get too vulnerable because I don't even know that you care about this and I don't want to dampen the mood too much. But basically in 2023, I went through a depressive episode, and the only thing I could do in that time was go to work. I had a job at the time, a retail job. And the only thing I could do was get up, take a shower, make myself presentable enough for work, go to work, come back, eat, repeat. And during that time, I lost my ability to watch TV shows, to read, and to watch movies. Based on my childhood, what I remember, what I've been told, I've never really been particularly good at watching TV. And it's not because there was a lack of shows to watch, because I grew up in peak Disney era and I grew up with so many exciting things to watch, but I was always very easily distracted as a child. I couldn't really focus on too much. So I think even watching TV series was so much better for me than watching movies. Movies as a child was tough for me. And it's not for lack of opportunity. Like, I had so many opportunities to watch amazing movies. And my sisters, actually, all of them love TV and movies. And there are movies that stand out to me as favorites because I was able to actually focus on them and I loved them. But watching TV as a child did not come naturally to me. It's something that I had to work, if that makes any sense. So I'm not surprised that in my depressive episode I lost my ability to watch TV and read. So coming out of that, I got back reading. That's why I even created this channel, to be honest, because I got reading back and I wanted to talk about it. But then I don't think I've got back movies and I don't think I've got back TV series yet. Shows that an ordinary person might binge in a day or two. It's taken me like 3 weeks to watch a show. And it's not even for the fact that I don't like the show. I like the show. I just can't watch it. And it's something that I can't even explain. It's so weird because I don't know why I can't watch something I like. I don't know why I can't concentrate. So I haven't got back watching TV shows in a way that I would consider normal. I've definitely watched TV shows, but for me, it's mostly start-stop. 2 days ago, I actually watched Devil Wears Prada 2, and I loved it, and I followed it from start to finish. And so there is hope, as well as the fact that I've read a couple of books since February. I think hope is on the horizon, but I think I'm still very much on the mend. So if you can be patient with me, I would very much appreciate it. And also, if you have experienced this kind of thing, let me know in the comments, because it's always nice to feel like you're not alone in your thoughts and your feelings. If you're struggling with reading, despite the fact that you are a reader, you're somebody who would consider yourself to be a reader, and for some reason you find yourself not being able to read like you want to, and therefore keep up with discourse and media around reading, let me know, because we can be in this together. We're going to go over the few books I've read over the last few months. The first book that I've successfully read since February was The Finest Kind of Fate by J.J. Mulder. If you know me, you know that J.J. Mulder is one of my favorite authors. At this point, I have read everything that J.J. Mulder has ever written, and I will continue to do so, because when you find an author that sparks so much joy from you and you want to read everything that they have ever written, be it a published book or their shopping list or a draft that they have never let anyone see, J.J. Mulder has very quickly become one of those authors for me. Oh, jeez, sorry about that. So this book follows Ewan and Shiloh. They were childhood best friends. They were super close growing up. They grew up in this small coastal town. So everybody knows each other. Everybody's kind of in each other's business. They were the kind of friends who were joined at the hip. Everybody knew that they were joined at the hip. Everybody knew that they were super close. They would spend time at each other's houses. And then Ewan lost his mother and he moves away from their town. I think he moves to California to pursue his art career because he's a painter. Shiloh stays behind. He becomes a fisherman. Obviously, it's a coastal town. It's like a no-brainer. I think his father was a fisherman as well, if I'm not mistaken. And so he stays put in their little small town, and then they lose touch. It's that situation where they've always kind of been in love with each other, but one person didn't realize it, and then one other person realized it, but was not in a mental space to be vulnerable about the fact that they were in love with the other person and pursue a relationship. Ewan comes back to the town because he is tired and he has basically painter's block. He's finding it hard to be inspired to produce work. And the thing about it is, although he is a successful artist, his clients expect him to be producing work. And if he's not producing work, then he cannot make money, and then if he can't make money, then he is losing his livelihood essentially. So he basically comes back to Sirens Point, I don't know, whatever the pronunciation is. He basically comes back to reconnect with his roots and see if it sparks anything. Shiloh still lives within the town and they get close again. They talk about the distance that they've had and the amount of time that they spent apart and the fact that they've missed each other all these years. And it was such a sweet book. I think J.J. Mulder is one of those writers that you can see their progress in real time as they publish subsequent work. They just get better and better. It was just so lovely to see them talk about their feelings, talk about where they went wrong and why they had to disconnect. And I think mental health was very much a big part of this book, talking about the effects of depression, of loss, of not feeling grounded to whatever it is brings you joy or whatever it is makes life feel worth living. So I think this book is very character driven. So if you are the kind of person who loves a character driven book, this is the book for you. There is not much happening in terms of plot. They spend a lot of time in this very small town. There's not very much going on. It's mostly just them focusing on rebuilding their relationship essentially. But it is so sweet. Shiloh is a dreamboat of a man. He's so sweet, so kind, so gentle. I think he might be as close to perfection as a person can be. His heart is so pure, and there's something so almost innocent about the way that he approaches life, the way he sees life, the way he sees people. He has such a huge heart. I loved all the discussion about sacrifice and what you're willing to do to keep the people you love in your life and compromise. JJ Mulder has never written a character I don't love. And the thing about her characters is they're not the same. Like I've read, this is probably the 9th or 10th book I've read by JJ Mulder, and they just grip me. They have me in a chokehold. To write 20 men that I love, what kind of talent is that? Just to write these characters that tug at your heartstrings and you root for them as if they were real people you knew. It feels so difficult to describe an author that you love so much, but this was such a beautiful book. If you are looking for a calm, sweet, but kind of sort of heart-wrenching love story between two people who have known each other, lost touch, and now are in a process of rediscovering each other, learning how to be patient with each other, learning how to be kind, learning how to sacrifice, I think it is the perfect book. The way that she describes Siren's Point was so beautiful. I love when an author is able to make you transport to the location of where the story is happening, and I think it happened very much in this book. It seemed like such a beautiful town. Obviously it's small and that has its disadvantages, but it seems so idyllic, and it seemed kind of like protected from the worst parts of the world, and I really love that, especially for somebody who was struggling mentally when I read this book. It was gentle, but it was like low-key spicy as well. Nothing felt out of place. Everything felt nicely paced, and if you've read it, I want to know what you think. It's different from her other books in the sense that it's not based around hockey this time or sports. It's now based around fishing and fishermen, and they had lovely side characters. I can't wait to read more about Oliver and Niels, who are in the next story, due to come out I think next month. I'm so excited because even the little tidbits that we got of them, I've also fallen in love with them. JJ Mulder needs to tell us her secret to creating these lovely men that just steal your heart. If you have read a JJ Mulder book, let me know what you think. What are your favorites? But also if you haven't, and this is the first time that you're hearing about JJ Mulder, please go and devour her backlog because you will not regret it if you are a romantic at heart. Then the next book I read was Starshipped by Sebastian. If you have been watching this channel for a while, you know how I feel about Sebastian at this point. I feel comfortable enough to say Sebastian is my favorite author of all time. My life feels like it has changed since I discovered Sebastian. The way that I see love, the way that I view love, my opinion of love, the way that I think that love should be, has all changed because of Sebastian. It sounds dramatic, but it's not. She is so talented, it's unreal. And she has now forayed into contemporary romance. This is her very first book that isn't a historical romance, and it's called Starshipped. And it features Charlie and Simon, who are co-stars on a long-running sci-fi show. That it's kind of enemies to lovers in the sense that they start off the book not particularly liking each other, but they have worked together for so many years, and there is a familiarity between them that makes sense within the context of the story. It was so interesting because I kept on having to remind myself that this was Sebastian, in the sense that I've read all of Sebastian's books. So in a way, my brain has become accustomed to her writing historical romance, writing about time periods that I would never be able to picture, will never be able to understand by virtue of the fact that I was born in the 21st century and I'm Gen Z. And so it was so weird to see her talk about things like TikTok and phones and social media and fans in a way that I have never seen her talk about. It wasn't bad. It didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the story. It was just so interesting because I kept on saying, wow, Sebastian is really writing about the modern world and it's throwing me off. It is... I'm speechless because it is such a beautiful book. Simon and Charlie... Let me collect myself because, wow... I don't want to say that they've dethroned Nick and Andy because I don't think they have. I'm not the kind of person that feels the need to necessarily compare and contrast people. But I do know that I have favorites of her characters. And for a very long time, I think Nick and Andy were on top of that. But every time I read a book, I'm like, are they my favorites? And Cat Sebastian, like JJ Mulder, at this point is incapable of writing a character I don't love. Also, can I just say, this is a single POV book, which again is another thing that threw me off because I'm very used to reading from two characters' perspectives in a Cat Sebastian book, and that is typically my preference when it comes to romance. But Cat Sebastian, for some reason, chose to write from just Simon's point of view. And there was a part of me that was scared that I would lose interest, that I would be bored, especially because at that time, like I said earlier, I was already struggling with reading. And I felt like if there isn't this big, massive ingredient that I know contributes heavily to my enjoyment of a book, which is a dual POV, will I struggle? Well, I'm here to tell you that I did not struggle at all. A time was had. This book was incredible. It had amazing side characters with all their co-stars. It felt like they had a found family. I think Charlie and Simon kind of have broken the mold for me in terms of characters I like, because they are both such needy men. And it's so interesting. I didn't think I would ever like a book dynamic with two extremely needy men. But I did. I thought they were perfect for one another. And actually, now that I think about it, maybe it does make sense for two needy people to be together. Because for them, when we start the book, we already know that they're attracted to one another. That's not really something that is up for debate. It's quite obvious. It's just that they don't like one another because of a little miscommunication, because of the fact that they each have thoughts and ideas about one another that is not really true. And it takes them spending time together to realize that who they thought the other person wasn't right. But it wasn't miscommunication in the way that is very annoying in a lot of books. It made sense. And it was really interesting to read about characters that are actually out or can be out. Because again, I'm used to historical romances where they have to hide their relationships because of the time period, but now they didn't really have to. And then it was so weird reading about fandoms within a book. I thought I would hate it because I often hate books that come too close to my reality, to what I see in real life. But I loved it here. I love seeing all the stuff that the fans would write in the forums about the two of them and how they were really shipping them for real. I thought it was really, really sweet. I think I have to do a full review of this book. I don't know if people are interested in watching reviews about one single book. I don't know that there's a market out there for that. But I think I really love Simon because he was so incredibly complex. He was a very sweet man, but he hid it under a very tough exterior. Like the way he presents himself to be, I think it's a coping mechanism where he doesn't really want people to see him as vulnerable as he is. And he grew up in a family where, while he doesn't really have that many problems with, he also says that he was an unplanned pregnancy in his parents' already failing marriage. So there wasn't a lot of space held for him to express himself, for them to get to know him. He has siblings that are a lot older than him, and even though they love him, they didn't really take time to get to know who Simon was. And for a large part, this is something that actually him and Charlie have in common, is that for a long time, they have each felt like burdens. They have had moments in life where they felt unwanted, and it goes back to their backstories. Simon being the last unplanned child of a marriage that was failing, and parents that didn't really put a lot of emphasis on his emotional well-being. They were very wealthy, so they provided for him in that regard. He went to all the best schools, he had the best education, but he didn't really feel very emotionally tied to his family. And then you have Charlie, who didn't grow up with a dad, who felt kind of unwanted by a stepfather that he really loved, and who had a mother who wasn't the most stable. Like I said, they've had moments where they felt unwanted, felt like a burden, felt unseen, felt unheard. And they meet each other, and because they're spending so much time together and sharing, they find out, oh my god, despite the fact that on the outside we are so opposite, we have so much in common. And the neediness that we each have is something that only two of us can understand, because it's hard to explain it to somebody who doesn't have those needs and those wants and those desires. But it's easy to explain it to you because you have them, albeit for different reasons and maybe in different ways. And so their relationship just felt so seamless. It felt like slotting pieces together. They had their challenges, understandably, because again, they had to learn how to communicate with each other. They had to learn how to talk to each other about what they wanted. But it felt very effortless in the way that it came together. I love the fact that they are constantly challenging each other as well. They have that kind of relationship where they are challenging each other, they are calling each other out. They have a very back and forth kind of relationship. They have a lot of very delicious banter that I could get behind. Simon is very prickly, and he's that kind of person that you could label to be difficult to work with or difficult to accommodate, but he has certain standards and he's very almost uncompromising. But on the plus side, he's also very compromising. This is the first book I've ever read where one of the main characters is able to go on to have a very platonic relationship with somebody that they have dated and slept with in the past, because Simon's ex features a lot in the story. He actually lives with Simon for the entirety of the story, and it's never a thing. It's never weird. It's just that they dated, they were together, and they figured out that they were better suited as friends. And there was never anything in this book that indicated that there would be any cheating in the future. It was entirely platonic. And I think it's such an interesting dynamic, because I think it's a fixture of society that you can't really be friends with your exes. But I think this book takes that narrative and spins it on its head, where it's like, actually you can be, especially with exes that you realize in hindsight weren't actually ever supposed to be a couple. So I loved that part of the book. Simon has anxiety disorder, he has OCD, so that also plays a massive role in this book. He's almost, I think, too aware of his shortcomings, and that is kind of what keeps him stuck, not only in terms of his work, but also in terms of his personal relationships. And it's something that I was happy to see him resolve. He's very self-deprecating, especially with talking about his therapy and his shortcomings. And he's so funny as well. Simon's particular brand of humor very much appeals to me. It's very dry. It's somewhat cutting, but it's the kind of humor that I find very attractive. It's the kind of humor that I really like. Not only because it's funny, but it almost feels very like intelligent and sophisticated, and I really loved it for that reason. But I think the overarching message of this book is that these two men, despite their flaws, they don't need to be anything other than who they are to be in this relationship. They do not have to shrink. They do not have to overly compromise. They do not have to disappear. They can be seen. They can be heard. They can make accommodations for each other. They can exist as full-fledged human beings within this relationship and be accepted. And they are the very definition of relationship goals. It's very hard to look at public people, at least for me, and think about them as relationship goals, because I don't truly know them. But with a book, it gives you insight, even though these are not real people, obviously, but it gives you insights into their relationship in a way that you don't get when you're watching other people from the outside. And they are absolutely relationship goals, Charlie and Simon. The intimacy for them is not only physical, it's mental as well, the intimacy between them. They felt very naked, not in a physical way, just like mentally, almost like they each stripped each other down until they had to develop that intimacy and the vulnerability within each other. And it was just so beautiful to see. It felt very raw at times, but I loved it. There was nothing about their dynamic that felt romanticized. It felt very real, and it actually felt very achievable, despite the fact that this is a very good functional relationship that they developed between them. I loved it. Cat Sebastian is brilliant. And the day that I discovered Cat Sebastian, I will never forget, because at this point she kind of feels like a disease, but a disease that I want. Like, she's in me, but I love it, because if this is what I get for loving Cat Sebastian, I'll take it. I will take it. She took two characters who were so bad at communicating and made them so good. And I was like, I don't think I've seen it done that way. The openness between them is something, I don't know, Cat Sebastian does this all the time. Cat Sebastian has changed the way I see love. Whenever I read a book, if the relationship is not like this, I don't want it. Look how speechless I am. I'm such a talkative, but when it comes to her and JJ Moore, I find it very difficult to talk about them, because they really tap into my emotional psyche. And clearly I haven't learned how to translate the way that I feel emotionally to the way that I'm speaking. So that is a skill I have to pick up. If you have read it, let me know what you think. I'm very much looking forward to Cat Sebastian doing more contemporary. I don't know if she has any plans to, but I was scared that I wasn't going to love it. But clearly, reading this book, I really had no right to be scared. It was brilliant. And I've loved almost everything I've ever read by Cat Sebastian, but this one is definitely at the top. Beside We Could Be So Good and He Should Be So Lucky and Kit Webb, Cat Sebastian she's bloody brilliant. And I cannot wait till Cat Sebastian is a big deal, because I have never wanted an author to blow up so badly, because the talent, insane. The next book that I read was called The Loner. It's by Riley Hart, and it's part of the Verse podcast series. So there's a guy called Declan, and he has a podcast with three of his best friends. They are three gay men, and so they run a podcast where they talk about their experiences, they interact with their listeners, they talk about dilemmas, just like a typical podcast, but it's being run by four gay men coming from different walks of life who are best friends and really want to fill, within this world anyways, that gap of having a podcast that represents a very underrepresented group of people. He meets this actor called Sebastian. They have a one-night stand that eventually turns into them infrequently sleeping together over a period of 10 years. So usually when Sebastian is in town, they'll meet up, they'll sleep together. They had a very sort of, I guess, friends with benefits kind of relationship, but they weren't really friends. They didn't really know very much about each other. They had this person around that they could sleep with, that they felt safe and comfortable with. And Sebastian, being famous, he was out. As a famous person, I guess it's easy to run into people that you can't trust. So with him, he could trust Declan, and they had an understanding that worked for them. And then Sebastian gets cheated on by his boyfriend. Also, cheating never happens because, for one, Declan doesn't date. And two, while Sebastian was dating his boyfriend, he never slept with Declan. So there's no cheating in this book at all. So his ex cheats on him with his best friend. So he loses his boyfriend and best friend in one sweep, which is devastating. So he reconnects with Declan, and they decide to take a pause on sleeping together and actually be friends. Declan is a bit apprehensive about this friendship, mostly because they have this attraction between them that they both know exists. Obviously, they've been sleeping together for 10 years. The attraction is not the issue. But Declan has a real issue letting people in and being emotionally vulnerable with anyone that is not one of his three best friends. His three best friends, they know him, they love him, but he has a bit of childhood trauma himself, so he's super reluctant about letting people in. Sebastian is really lonely, and he realizes, I've become an actor, I've achieved my dreams, I make a lot of money, but I have no friends and I have no one I can trust. And Sebastian has a lovely family, by the way. He has lovely parents, lovely siblings, but they live far away. If I'm not mistaken, they live in Idaho. Sebastian lives in California, and then he's all over the place filming. So he's really lonely because humans need connection, even outside of family. So he decides to befriend Declan. He's like, we don't have to be sleeping together. Let's just see if we can build a friendship in a way that we've never really had the chance to. And so they do, and they end up both feeling really fulfilled by the friendship, and then it obviously progresses to more, and it's a really sweet book. I really liked it. I don't know if it's a favorite for me. I think sometimes it dragged, but to what extent that was the quality of the book or my mental state is the issue. Because when I am struggling sometimes, I find it hard to determine whether or not it's because the book is really just average for me, or if it's because at the time I was struggling. But then I didn't struggle with Starshipped, and I didn't struggle with Finest Kind of Fate. I don't know. Anyways, I thought it was good. It didn't really stand out to me as like extraordinary, but I did enjoy what it did. I loved how over time they broke down each other's walls, particularly Declan, because Declan's walls were high and they were strong. But I love that over time he let Sebastian in. Sebastian, honestly, at times I felt so bad for him because you could tell he really wanted friends. He really wanted a village of his own, and it took quite a bit of time to get there. I loved Declan's relationship with his three best friends. They are so lovely. They're also different as well, the guys. I especially loved his relationship with Parker. I think Parker is the one that he's closest to within the friend group, and they have such a sweet relationship that is rare to see between men, I think. At least for me. Maybe it's not rare in general, but it's rare for me to see a relationship like that between men, and it's so sweet that they each have each other, and then Sebastian was able to also be part of the friend group, which means that alongside getting a friend in Declan, which eventually turned into getting a relationship, he got three friends, and I thought it was really lovely. I'm not really sure that I want to jump so quickly into the subsequent books in the series. I do know that they exist, and given that I did enjoy this one, I think I might enjoy the next ones, but I'm not rushing to get back into it. But I think I might eventually read the rest and let you know how I feel. I think this was a solid 3.5 star read. I don't know if I would ever read it again. I think if you like found family, if you like a book that features friends, if you like books that talk about vulnerability and childhood trauma and moving past that, then you will definitely like this book. And then the next book that I read was Davo by N.R. Walker. I love this book. This is a solid highlight for me. So this book follows Fergus and Davo. So Fergus moves to the Australian outback to do a bit of research for the university that he works on. The industry that he's focused on is the mining industry. So he's going to a mining town to live for a couple of months to talk to the people, do some in-person research about what it is like to live in that kind of environment, to work in those kind of very harsh conditions in a very tough, dangerous job. They want to know the effects on the people there. And then he meets Davo. I think Davo's actually an engineer. They connect instantly. Davo wears skirts very often. And that was actually his first impression of Davo, meeting him for the first time. And then you see this rugged, very kind of stereotypically masculine presented man. And then he had a skirt on. He's very comfortable with who he is. He wears shorts, he wears trousers, he wears skirts. It's very much his normal, and nobody around him bats an eye. I think that was what I loved most about this book. The fact that there was this man who wears these skirts and everybody around him is supportive of him. Nobody bats an eye, nobody cares. He just is able to live his life. And I don't think I've ever read a book based in Australia, so there was so much to learn. I love the addition of all the slangs, all the nicknames, because I think Australia has, correct me if I'm wrong, they have a reputation for being able to create kind of like the best nicknames. So you had these people who had actual names but had a lot of really interesting, unique nicknames, and apparently it's a thing for Australia, which I think is really cool. I didn't know that going into the book. And what I loved most is, I guess you could say, sometimes when people go to do research, they go in looking for all the bad sides to what it is that they're researching. And sometimes you can't really make assumptions about the kind of lives that people lead based on your own assumptions. And I think that was probably one of my favorite parts of the book, is Fergus talking to Davo and also the people who live in Panalego, and them talking about how much they love their little mining town. They love their community. They understand that they live a very different life to most people. They understand that their living circumstances aren't particularly normal, but it is their life. They've made the best of it and they're enjoying their lives. They have struggles like any other person. There are pitfalls to living the way that they do, but it doesn't mean that they don't love their lives. And I love the fact that it was very much a point that each of them made, but particularly Davo, when he would talk about it. They were very defensive and protective of their lives there, and later on in the story there does come a point where they have to defend their town and their jobs, and they do. It was just lovely because it's a completely different life to what I know, but I felt the love that they had for their lives, and I did want them to keep it because it just felt really beautiful to see them talk about their lives that way. I love the connection between Fergus and Davo. It's a very short book. I actually didn't mind it, even though it was insta love and insta lust. It did feel real, and I loved their connection. Sorry, my light died. One of my favorite parts of the book is them talking about the skirts, because it's not very typical to see a man going around wearing skirts. And I love the fact that Davo talked about him just really wanting to wear his skirts in peace. There are books that challenge your perspective and make you realize things about yourself that you may not previously have realized. And I've come to the conclusion that I don't understand a lot about why the world is so overly gendered. The more that I expand my reading and the more that I read books about people who are in different circumstances than what I grew up with or what I'm used to, it becomes clear to me that I think in many ways conventionality is boring. And I came out of the book thinking to myself, why would anyone have a problem with somebody else choosing to wear a skirt? Like, I don't understand it. Or wearing pink. I'm just like, there are so many legitimate problems with the world that we live in. And the fact that we as a society choose to single out things like wearing skirts or men wearing pink, truly, I think it shows a fundamental flaw. We put so much emphasis on things that don't matter in the grand scheme of things, and put such little emphasis on things that do matter, that do actively cause harm to people. We're very blasé about things that we should really not be blasé about. And then you'll hear like overly critiquing somebody wearing a skirt as a man. The older I get, when I measure things that are supposedly wrong that society rejects and things that are real actual problems, I'm like, guys, are you really telling me that a man putting on a skirt is a bigger issue than, say, protecting children? Sometimes I just think we could really do with a shift in prioritizing certain things. And it's books like these that remind you that what is the big deal? Live and let live. I loved it. This is one of the best books I've ever read. My only problem with this book is that it was very short. I wish it was a full-fledged story. I think it was just over 100 pages. So I wish it was longer because I loved them together and I wanted to see more of them together. And I wanted to hear more about their town. And I fell in love with their town. I fell in love with everything that their relationship represented. I loved Davo. I would have loved to read from Davo's POV because this was entirely in Fergus's POV. I would have loved to read more about Davo because I found him a very interesting, compelling character, and I loved how confident he was in himself, and I loved the fact that everything about him was really attractive. And even when they encountered problems, Fergus had a bit of baggage from his previous relationship, and I love that when it did come up, the couple of times that I remember it coming up, they just kind of talked about it and resolved it, and it was very quick. I think the author knew that this was going to be a book that was very brief, so they didn't really do a lot of beating around the bush. She was very frank in the way that it was done. This is one of the standout books that you're like, I'm glad I discovered this book. Everything about it I loved completely. It's a beautiful love story. It is beautiful in terms of community and found family, and it was beautiful in terms of challenging perceptions and making you consolidate and really think about what is important in life versus what isn't. And I think it definitely challenged my thoughts and my biases and the way in which I've grown up, and I loved it for that. The next book I read was Red Dirt Hart, and it's part of the Red Dirt series, also by N.R. Walker. Clearly I was in a very Australian outback mood, so I immediately sought out the next book I can get my hands on that had that vibe. And then I found Red Dirt Hart. Oh God of mercy, I found Red Dirt Hart. That's very hard to say, by the way. Oh God, oh my goodness, it's a real tongue twister. Anyway, so this fucking hell. This this follows Charlie and Travis. So Travis is an American college student. So he arrives in Sutton Station, which is one of the largest working farms in the Australian outback. So again, we're talking about extreme temperatures, very hot, very dry kind of temperatures. But yeah, there are people living out there that are working to provide food and all sorts for the continuation of humanity, which is amazing because I think it takes a massive amount of sacrifice. Charlie runs this farm, and in comes Travis just to see how farmers make their living back in Australia. So he's come all the way from, I think, Texas in America, do a bit of research, also work on the farm as well, get some work experience, and then obviously attraction forms between him and Charlie, and they get to know each other and they fall in love. Charlie had a lot of hang-ups to get over because Travis was a lot more open, was a lot more, I guess, accepting of the attraction between them and pursuing a relationship, whereas I think Charlie had a lot of baggage. He had a father that was aware of the fact that he likes men but was not a fan of it. He always doubted Charlie's capabilities. He always doubted Charlie's ability to run the farm because he was not a stereotypical man who liked women. I don't know how people are comfortable doubting people's skills because of who they are attracted to. It seems like a very weird thing before you realize that it's actually real. People do actually think, wow, you don't want to sleep with women, therefore you cannot run a farm. It seems very stupid when you say it like that until you realize this is actually a thought that people have, and they go on to scar other people as a result. So Charlie has resolved himself to a life of isolation because he realizes that he's attracted to only men and he will never be in love with a woman. But at the same time, he's not interested in marrying a woman just for marrying's sake and destroying somebody's life in the process. Charlie has resigned himself to a life of loneliness. He wants love. He wants to be in a relationship. He wants that connection. But he is all too aware of the fact that he lives in extreme conditions that a lot of people don't live in by virtue of his job and the location of his job. But I think also he hasn't dealt with all the self-loathing that has come from the fact that he was not accepted by his father, the fact that his father didn't value him as a person, as a man, as an heir to this business because he was a gay man. So all of these thoughts, all of these doubts, all of these fears really come across in this book, and it's something that they actively have to work through. He has amazing staff. He has this couple that he runs the farm with who have been with him since childhood, and they love him so much, and I appreciated them so much because I think they helped to push the story forward, because Charlie needed a lot of help to really grab onto this relationship that he really wanted. So it's just him working through his issues. Travis had a little accident in the farm that could have been life-ending, but they worked through that, and I really enjoyed it. I think if you liked Davo, you'll definitely like this book. And there are more books in the series, also centered around their particular relationship, because they were together by the time it ended, but you could tell that I think the author still had more to say. So if I do end up getting to read the subsequent books, I will let you know how I feel about them. But overall, I think I enjoyed it. I think this was a solid 3 stars for me. I loved the subject matter that it tackled, but I wouldn't outrightly say that I fell in love with the book or the characters. It was just one of those books that I think was good, but I think might be a little bit forgettable in a way that Devo is not. Then I also went on to read Meddling by Hailey Reaves. So this story follows Liam and Nick. They play professional hockey. One plays for Team USA. I think the other one plays for Canada, I believe. I think the book was essentially marketed as for fans of heated rivalry, although I don't really think that this had the kind of development, and I didn't feel as attached. I don't think it's as good as heated rivalry, to be honest, but again, I think it's a debut book for the author. I think this book could have done with a bit more development. It just kind of fell flat. I didn't really like the story or the pacing. It felt kind of boring at times, just because I feel like they went from not particularly liking each other to liking each other very quickly, and it felt like there wasn't enough to bridge the gap, if that makes any sense. So for me, it fell flat in that regard. There was a lot of outside, I guess maybe this was the plot of the book, coming to terms with being publicly out, one person not wanting to be out, one other person wanting to be out, the fact that they were rivals, the fact that they had this career. But I felt like it was done in a way that felt kind of convoluted at times, and I struggled to see kind of what the point of the story was. It almost felt like fanfic of heated rivalry, not done very well. I think it could have done with a bit of editing. I don't want to say it was bad, because I definitely read the book from start to finish, but I think there is a lot of work that could have been done to make it a better book, and I hope that Hailey gets better as she publishes more. It was a little bit funny. I did like the funny moments. I also loved the autism representation. Obviously, I'm not in a position to say if it was good representation of autism, because I'm not autistic myself. So obviously, it'd be nice to hear from somebody who is on the spectrum to say if it was or not. But I think that was my favorite part of the book. Liam divulging the fact that he was autistic, and the way that Nick took to it, and the way that they actually discussed it. I think the ending of the book I loved so much more than the beginning. The beginning and the middle were a bit la-di-da, but then the ending, I was like, oh, this could have been a really good book, because I really liked it. So it's interesting to say, because I didn't mind it at all, and it could have been better, but I think there wasn't enough done to set them up from the beginning. There wasn't enough of building that bridge between them not being able to stand each other and now liking each other to loving each other. The plot and the pacing was off. It was just alright. The next book I read was From the Ashes, Love and Ruin at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair by Logan Sage Adams. I've read 2 books previously from Logan Sage Adams, so I knew that I was in for good writing. I knew that I was in for good characters that feel like full-fledged people. This book follows Arthur and Jesse. So Arthur is a flamboyant and very excitable child of one of Chicago's most prominent families. He kind of ruined his reputation when he basically got his friend pregnant at a really young age, and then he had to rush to marry her, because at the time it would have been seen as unacceptable to have a child out of wedlock. So he married her, and then she died in childbirth. So he has been a single father from the age of like 21, and now he's like 36, and he's been raising his child on his own, but alongside his very good friend Charlotte, who was a friend to both him and his deceased wife. So she tutors Emma, who is his daughter, and then she also helps raise Emma, and she's that kind of female presence in Emma's life. And then you have Jesse, who is the lead pressman at the printing press that Arthur owns. He actually works at a printing press, and then Arthur buys the printing press, and that's how they meet. Jesse has his own baggage to deal with, because he was previously in college for engineering, and going to school for engineering was always his dream and his way to get out of poverty, except that he wasn't able to finish college for reasons that you will find out when you read the book. And it all ties into his preference for men and how that wasn't acceptable in society at the time. And it was just so heartbreaking because Jesse's so brilliant, and you can tell that he's kind of sort of overqualified for where he is right now in terms of his career, but he's stuck because it's very hard to make that sort of upward trajectory from being from a lower economic background, and his engineering was supposed to help with that, and it didn't pan out. So he meets Arthur, and I think there's immediate attraction between them, but Jesse's also really snarky in a way that you don't expect, because Arthur is essentially his boss, but he's a bit sassy when they first meet. And I think that's something that Arthur is drawn to, because Arthur was actually quite unconventional, and he's, I don't know, very flamboyant, and his family is very conventional, and he comes across as like an excited puppy, not very serious. So his family doesn't take him seriously, society doesn't really take him seriously, and so he buys this printing press in an attempt to finally get people to take him seriously and to improve his reputation and improve his standing in society. I think the most interesting thing about Arthur is the fact that he is so unconventional in his approach to life, but he is so bogged down by societal expectation. He's acutely aware of the fact that he does things very differently from how people in his social circle do things. He's bisexual. He knows that he dresses differently. The way that he wants to live his life is different. They rebel in that sense, but then he's so desperate to cling on to his societal standing. He wants to be respected. He wants to be taken seriously. He wants to be seen as somebody who is worthy of respect in the way that he respects other people. So that was the central conflict in the book. Arthur coming to terms with the fact that he's very different from the people who raised him and the society he was raised in. And he has now fallen in love with somebody that his family would never approve of in terms of social economic status, but also in terms of gender, because this is a man. And he has to work through whether or not he thinks being in society in the way that he has been is more important than being with the love of his life. And Jesse has been in this situation before where he's fallen in love with somebody that is very wealthy and from Chicago's elite. And it didn't work out, and it is one of the biggest mistakes he ever made in terms of the trajectory of his life. So he's also very reluctant to get into a relationship with Arthur for fear of it happening again and his life being even more derailed. And so they have to work through those issues together. I absolutely love this story. I'm not going to lie. I loved Giuseppe, who was Jesse's best friend, who also came from a low economic background. I loved, his character. The resentment that he felt for the upper classes was very real, especially given how they affect his own life on a day-to-day basis. I loved Charlotte. Charlotte is one of Arthur's best friends. She's also a lesbian. So she's kind of like Arthur in the sense that she's kind of a rebel in society, and she chose not to get married. And for that, they're kind of like a bit shunned. But they have a little fan family together, especially with Arthur's, small staff that he keeps that feels less like staff, more like extended family. And I absolutely just love this book. I rated it 5 stars. I'm not surprised given how I felt about Logan Sage Adams' previous books. She is a brilliant writer. Her attention to detail is second to none. She's obviously a historical romance writer, so there is a lot of detail that she has to add to distinguish it from a contemporary romance, and there is copious amounts of research in this book, but it's not done in a way that it's boring. It's so interesting. It draws you in. It paints a picture that you can almost visualize. It's incredible how she's able to compose her stories and her characters, and I absolutely just adore this book, and I'm looking forward to reading more Logan Sage Adams because I kind of forgot how much I loved her writing, and now I'm reminded that I really, really do, and I should read the rest of her backlog. Loved that they had to stumble into really hard times and have really tough conversations, but at the end of the story you got a compromise that I felt works for each of them, and really nobody was left behind, which I think is usually the problem when you have so many differences between the two MCs. You want a story that ends in a way that you feel does justice to both of them and feels realistic for them in a way that they can actually go on to live a good life, because that's the whole point of characters you love. You want them to go on to live a good life, and I thought that they ended up getting a really, really happy ending. So I absolutely loved it. If you like historical romance with talks of social economic status, class differences, even a bit of machinery talk, which I didn't think I would enjoy, but I loved, because Logan Sage Adams is great at research and has a great way of putting information that doesn't feel too heavy if you know nothing about the subject matter. and I thought that was really good. I never knew anything about the World's Columbian Exposition, so it was good to learn about that alongside this really lovely love story. So if you have read it, let me know what you think. Then the last book I read was Bridgerton, book number 1, The Duke and I. And I'm not really going to go into too much detail because we've all watched the show. I'm sure a lot of you have read the books, so you know what the story is about. All I will say about this book is that it is such a pity that the SA scene and Simon's very deliberate deceit of Daphne exists in this book, because otherwise I really think I would have loved this book. And the misogyny on page was hard to read because I tend to avoid male-female historical romances because misogyny on page, even more than what we are used to in this day and age, is very hard for me to read, and it's very hard for me to ignore. And one of the reasons why I've avoided this book for so long is that I knew that we were going to be confronted by the inherent misogyny that runs through them, because by virtue of the time period that it was in and what women needed to do to survive, I knew I wasn't going to enjoy that. So I went into the book knowing that. It was so hard to read, but I did know that going into it. I think probably the most frustrating part was the essay that is treated like no big deal, which is... if the genders were reversed, we would be throwing a fit, because it is something that should be called out and should be talked about. And the fact that it was no big deal in the book and it wasn't a big deal in the show is very disappointing, because it feels like in many ways we have not made any progress. And then obviously Simon lying to Daphne and omitting so much. And I really feel like without those things, it could have been a really good book. And that, I think, is probably the most disappointing part of it, because I enjoyed their dynamic, to be honest, especially after they got over it and when they were getting to know each other. They were very funny with each other. And I loved Daphne in the book. I loved her character, I loved her attitude, I loved the fact that even though she had so many limitations, she still felt like a woman that was very likable. It's a pity, because the book is not bad. It's certainly not as bad as I thought it would be, because I've heard bad reviews about this book. It's unfortunate, those things, but particularly the essay, but also the lying, because I really do feel like my perception of the book would have been very different if we didn't have those things, and it would have been a favorite. It's unfortunate because it really does ruin things. If you're somebody who is very opposed to behavior of that kind, if you're not somebody who enjoys seeing people being lied to, manipulated, assaulted, because that was an assault. We're not going to sit here and coddle. If you're somebody who is allergic to problematic behavior, you cannot see past those things. And that is the worst part, because I'm like, it could have been so different. And it wasn't. You can't overlook it. If you're gonna add something like that to a book, then please address it. Please. Just bloody address it, because the fact that it was just treated like no big deal is crazy to me, especially with somebody with already existing trauma. And after the fact, the trauma came back full. Oh, shit. It was, wow. Yeah. I don't know how Julia Quinn feels about this in hindsight, but if it were me, I would have made some amends in terms of making sure that it was addressing, because the show isn't particularly faithful to the books. So I feel like the show was a chance to right certain wrongs, and they still didn't. So it could have been so different, because without those things, it really is an enjoyable book. And Daphne and Simon are the first MF couple that I've really liked in a long time, but their story is completely colored and muddied by the circumstances that occurred, and I can understand why people hate it for that reason. And I think it's a very understandable reason to hate the books, to be honest. Thank you so much for sticking around. I'm sorry that I disappeared for so long. It's been a tricky time for me, because it's very difficult to have a channel centered around books and not be able to read, therefore not have anything to talk about. But I feel like I'm getting better. I feel like I'm making progress. I feel like a lot less cloudy, a lot less depleted. And so I'm hoping that things get better. I can be a lot more active and a lot more creative with this channel. Thank you so much for all the subscribers. I'm almost at 100 subscribers, which is crazy and doesn't seem like a lot until you realize that I've been running this page for over a year. And I did not expect to have 100 people subscribe to me of their own volition. So in that regard, I'm massively thankful. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, what your thoughts are. Let me know what you're reading. Let me know if you've experienced anything that I've talked about in this video. And I will hopefully see you when I see you. Bye-bye.